Now let's talk about the mechanism of gas exchange and respiration. The gas exchange in humans happens in 3 stages. External respiration, that happens in the lungs, in the alveoli. It's when the oxygen enters from the air into the blood, into the red blood cells, and at the same time carbon dioxide leaves blood, comes out into the air and gets exhaled. Then the gases have to be transported by the blood to different tissues and cells in the body. And inside the body, in the cells and tissues, that's where internal respiration happens. And this is gas exchange between the cells and the blood. So the cells receive oxygen from the red blood cells, from the blood, and at the same time, they release carbon dioxide into the blood, so it can be carried away. The process of breathing or getting air into the lungs and out of them can be explained by the law of physics. So air always moves to the area where the pressure is lower. So in our case, if the pressure in lungs is lower than outside, the air will be drawn into the lungs. When the pressure in the lungs becomes higher than the outside, the atmospheric pressure, the air will be pushed off the lungs. So these changes in the pressure in the lungs are created by the movement of the chest cavity. So in the case of inhalation or inspiration, the air would move inside the lungs. And that happens because the rib muscles, they contract and they pull the chest cavity or thoracic cavity a little bit up and outside. And that increases its volume. At the same time, the diaphragm, this is the muscle that's located under the chest cavity, big flat muscles, it gets contracted also and it pulls down. And both these actions of the rib muscles and of the diaphragm increases the size of the chest cavity. So the size of the chest cavity increases, but the pressure inside of it decreases. So it becomes less than atmospheric pressure and the air will be drawn inside the chest cavity. This is an active process because the muscles contract. In the case of exhalation, the rib muscles relax and the diaphragm relaxes too. So the chest cavity becomes smaller because the rib muscles kind of drop it down, and the diaphragm, when it's relaxed, it comes up. So it also decreases the overall volume of the chest cavity. The volume decreases, the pressure increases, and that pushes air out of the lungs. So this is exhalation. Usually it's unless you strain to exhale more than you can, this process is passive because the muscles are not really involved in it, they just relaxed. And that causes the air to come out of the lungs. So just to show you it again, so if you look here, the volume of the chest cavity during the inhalation or inspiration is much bigger than when you exhale. So the air is drawn into the lungs and the air is pushed out of the lungs. And that's how we breathe. There are situations when patients or people need a little bit of help with breathing, when they cannot perform themselves, and scientists and engineers have been interested in creating the artificial lungs, the artificial ventilation machines for a very long time. It's like starting already in 17th century. I don't have the picture of these ancient machines, but these are some of the early examples of artificial lungs. And here's like, if you want to read, there's a little bit history of it. But creation of this new and improved versions of the iron lungs was very timely because in 1940s and 1950s, there was a very severe epidemics of polio. Poliomyelitis is a virus that damages the central nervous system, but as a result of this damage, There are no signals to the rib muscles, and this paralyzes the rib muscles. So people suffocated and died because they could not breathe. And at this time, these iron lungs, so this is a picture of a polio wing in a hospital, and you see all these patients, the iron lungs helped them to breathe. So until the vaccine was invented, it was invented here in the United States by Salk and distributed. Polio was it's very contagious and it damages a lot of people. And iron lungs really saved their lives. And I also always show this picture for the people who object to vaccinations, because when they say we don't need them, and I say like don't need them because we are all vaccinated, and that's what things look like when the people were not vaccinated. How do the gases travel in the blood? And it's different for oxygen and carbon dioxide. Most of oxygen gets bound to a special protein that's called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, I showed it before when we talked about the proteins, is formed by 4 polypeptide chains. It also contains special centers that contain iron. That's called hemes, and these centers, they bind oxygen. So one big hemoglobin molecules can bind 4 oxygen molecules in the lungs. And that's how oxygen is carried to the tissues. And in the tissues, the hemoglobin releases oxygen, so oxygen can be delivered to the cells. Just one red blood cells can contain up to 300 million of hemoglobin molecules. Each one carries 4 oxygen molecules, so up to 1.2 billion of oxygen molecules can be transported by just one cell. And also the presence of iron, that's what determined the red color of our blood, because when iron binds to oxygen, it acquires this bright red color. It's something like, rust. Rust is the product of interaction of iron with the oxygen. It's reddish. So it's pretty much like this in the also in the hemoglobin, when the complex of iron with oxygen gives this bright red color and our blood is red. So in the lungs, the hemoglobin picks up the oxygen, pretty much all of them, 98.5%. Carries to the tissues, loses it, becomes deoxyhemoglobin. Some of it picks up carbon dioxide and carries it back to the lungs. But mostly carbon dioxide directly dissolves in blood plasma, in the liquid part of the blood. And also in the plasma, it interacts with the water and turns into this substance. It's called bicarbonate. And this bicarbonate is very important for the regulation of blood acidity. So respiratory system is not only involved in the cellular respiration, but also regulates the blood acidity. So in other words, oxygen is carried by the hemoglobin, carbon dioxide, some of it travels with the hemoglobin, some of it dissolves in blood plasma, and some of it forms the bicarbonate that supports or maintains the correct acidity of the blood. So what controls the breathing? The breathing is controlled by the breathing centers in the brain. The centers are, if you remember, are in the brainstem, in the ancient brain. But it's interesting that the breathing patterns are mostly regulated by the content of carbon dioxide. There are certain sensors in the body that respond to the content of oxygen, but they only switch on when the content of oxygen is extremely low. So how fast or how you breathe is determined by how much carbon dioxide you have in your blood. So when the content of carbon dioxide increases in the blood, that makes the blood a little bit acidic. And there are sensors that sitting in the major blood vessels go into the body or go into our brain that sense these changes. So at the same time, the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that fills the empty spaces in the brain and in the central nervous system, it also becomes a little bit acidic. And these signals also go to the brain. I mean, from the brain to the brain. So the breathing center in the brainstem sends signals to the lungs, or not to the lungs, but to the rib muscles to contract and also to do this strongly. So you breathe heavier, deeper, and to do it more often. So the person starts to breathe in faster and deeper. This increases the oxygen of this increases the content of oxygen and decreases the level of carbon dioxide in the blood. So because the carbon dioxide decreases in the blood acidity returns to normal and everything is back to what it should be. So I will repeat it again. It's not the oxygen that determines how fast and deep we breathe, it's the carbon dioxide. And the last question, how do the unborn babies breathe? Because they are developing in the uterus, they're surrounded by the fluid, and definitely they cannot breathe through this fluid. And the answer is they do not breathe until they're born, because again, it is impossible while they are in the womb. So instead of these, they still have to receive oxygen and remove CO2 from their body. So this happens with the help of the circulatory system of the mother. So the blood vessels of the baby and the blood vessels of the mother come in a very close contact in a structure called placenta. And it is in the placenta when the mother's blood loses oxygen. This oxygen gets in the blood system of the baby and supplies the baby cells with oxygen. And it's also where the carbon dioxide from the baby's blood diffuses into the mother's blood vessels and then carried out to the mother's lungs when she will inhale this CO2. I just have to mention that the circulatory system, their vessels do not fuse. They simply are very close to each other, so they can exchange these gases. But when the baby is born and the contact with the placenta, the umbilical cord is cut, so no more oxygen from the mother. So the content of carbon dioxide in the blood increases, and that kicks off the breathing center in the baby's brain, and that's what initiates the breathing. So once the baby is born, that's for the first time it takes a deep breath, and that's what inflates the lungs. And now the lungs it opens the lungs, it fills them with the air, and now the baby can breathe by itself. And that's why it's so important, what everyone is waiting for, the first cry of the baby, because exactly that's the moment when the lungs of the child start working. And we finish with the respiratory diseases in the next part.